All right. Hello, folks. Hope you all having a good week. We're in, I've already made the joke, we're in the Wednesday of the semester, but things are looking up. Actually, it's weird because it's dark outside and it's cold, but I feel like the energy levels are higher. Although it was an interesting discussion. Had discussion with my graduate students. Apparently, in Violet Hall, they tried to predict the weather being cooler on Monday and Tuesday, and it was just like blisteringly hot here Monday and Tuesday. Like it was bad in here on Monday or Monday. It was worse in my audio class on Monday, and then I didn't teach yesterday, but Dr. Caden was telling me like she's like notoriously one of the most warm blood people in the world. So she's constantly got some sort of jacket or something. She had to take off her jacket during her class. I don't think you realize how big a deal that is, you know. I don't think I've ever seen her without a jacket. I think if she was walking through the middle of the deserts in Arizona or California, she would probably still have her jacket on. Says, yeah, it's a bit chilly, you know, it's a bit chilly, like 100 degrees. Yeah, so yeah, that's how warm it was, and I heard some of the students talk about that. But it does seem to be pretty good right now. I think everybody's in pleasant condition. We all good. So I don't want anything to detract from the learning experience. You know, we try to keep the rooms nice and cool because that keeps learning fresh. Okay, that's what we're trying to do here. All right, so today we're going to do part 5 of NetSuite. And I want to caution you on this one. There is not a lot to this particular section as far as the amount of work you do. You will not probably type anything in other than maybe when you have to type in to save your file to PDF. There's going to be a lot, or there's going to be a few clicks. I make you the joke that we could see how few clicks we could actually use to complete this particular activity. It is very minimal. I do not want that to detract from the importance of this particular activity. We are finishing the purchasing process. It will be important for you to know all the steps in the purchasing process and how they relate to NetSuite. So we'll be reflecting back on that. So before we get started on the activity itself and just kind of the steps, legitimately speaking, if I just wanted to walk you through the steps and not walk you through the intuition behind the steps, this would take 5 minutes. And I know some of you are just kind of like 5-minute class, sign me up, you know. But that doesn't really help out the learning because I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the intuition about what we're doing. It's not to make this tedious, it's not to make this arduous, it's to make you understand every single step has a purpose within the system and has a purpose within the process, and we need to relate that back to the process. So if you remember, we started this process out last week. We're in the purchasing process. We bought some inventory, our I Love AIS textbooks, and then we actually created our purchase order. We did do a step before we created the purchase order. Let's go ahead and reflect back on where we went from this, okay? So went to setup, accounting, and accounting preferences. Did everybody remember doing this? This is like where I started to make the purchase order, then I stopped and said, we need to do this first, okay? We had to go to this area, we clicked on order management, and we clicked on receiving. What were we looking at here? Does everybody remember? Looking at that bill in advance of receipt, all right? And that was one of those things we had to make sure it was not checked. And in fact, it was not checked. I don't think anybody in this room had a check mark on this one, but we had to verify that that was not the case. And this is one of those controls checks that we have to make sure is in place. Now, some organizations may actually allow for billing in advance of receipt, which I think it's a bad idea, because what would happen in this situation? And we're going to see this in play, by the way. We're going to see this in play today. We actually have to manually approve a billing to occur. But if this was the case, basically what NetSuite would do is that the moment that we've issued the purchase order, our vendor is allowed to then send us an invoice. So the purchase order goes to the vendor says, okay, we can send them an invoice. What do they not necessarily have to send us before they send that invoice? Yeah, the goods, the order itself, with the inventory that's associated with that, which is a bad idea. Because if we don't have a check to make sure that that purchase order has been fulfilled, then somebody could actually pay the bill and our vendor would get away with money without actually having to provide any service. Now, you know, that sounds like a good way to make a business. If you could just provide no goods or services whatsoever and have people send you money, that would be a wonderful job to have. But unfortunately, that's not the world that we're going to operate in. That's not what I'm going to teach you all. Okay. In many situations, we tend to call that fraud. So yeah, I'm going to teach you all to try to avoid fraud wherever possible and do diligent business, make diligent business decisions. So we created our purchase order, and that's where we're at right now. We have a purchase order in the system. And remember, we verified in our purchase order that we were going to receive our goods on October 23rd, 2024. Guess what? It is October 23rd, 2024. So let's go ahead and let's receive our goods. So here's what I would like for you to do. Let's go back to the home screen. Now, remember, I alluded to this back last time, and I said that this is going to be kind of our starting point for any place we need to go. If you get lost at any point, this is generally going to be your point of reference. There will be a caveat to that. There will be one step that we cannot fulfill from the home screen, and I will specify that a little bit. When we actually have to print our check for payment, we do have to do that manually. And the reason for that is twofold. Basically, what would happen is that if we had a certain setup in the system, it would actually create electronic payments for us. So we wouldn't have a need to actually create a written check where we have to sign it and pay it out. We could actually have a credit card payment made or an electronic funds transfer. In this specific situation, we have not specified within our system what type of payments to be made. So that's why we're going to go through the process of putting out a check. In most of these scenarios, that will not need to be fulfilled. We would not have to do that in the real world. If you start working in NetSuite or some other payment processing system or ERP system, basically, once you actually authorize the payments, then the payment will be fulfilled through some other manner. But we're going to walk through that step. That cannot actually be fulfilled through through just working through our document processes. But every single other step is actually flows from the previous step. So here's what we're first going to do is we're going to go back to where we were at. So I want you to go ahead and click on that purchase order. And we're going to go ahead and find where our next step is going to be. So purchase order has been sent to our supplier. What is the logical next step once that purchase order has been sent? What needs to happen? In our BPMN diagram, we've got the activity. Okay, we got the purchase order has been issued. The next step would be to what? Receive the goods. Okay, receive the goods from the supplier. We want to make sure that those goods are received, which presumably that will happen. Okay, so you notice it says pending receipt. Okay, that's where we're at. So your next step is going to be to click on receive. Now, you can do that right now. I do want to make a note. We are going to walk through this, both the shortcut method and we're going to walk through this as the longhand method. And the question is, will we be responsible for an understanding the longhand, like what we ought to go through? I am unlikely to ask you a detailed question, like show you the steps that we have to walk through to get through this manually, but it's probably a good reference to notes just in case you get lost, okay? I'm not going to try to ask too many specific questions in that regard on the exam. So like when I show you here how we get to the receiving step, the long way to get to the receiving step, you don't really need to memorize the path of the list, but again, it's good reference to note that we can actually achieve it. So for all of you in this room that have this ability, go ahead and click on receive. I want to show you how we can actually get through this manually through NetSuite. So we're going to go to transactions, purchases, and receive orders. And I wanted to show you this because I wanted to show you basically where our purchase order currently is. It's kind of sitting in limbo saying it's ready to receive. And you can see we got the list of purchase orders that are all open. Remember our purchase order was 118, so we need to find 118 on our list. So we scroll down and here it is right here. And at this point right here, there's a couple of options. We can go back to the purchase order and just click on receive, or we can click on receive right here. It's going to take me to the same place that you all are currently at. So currently our purchase order is pending receipts, and it's now the date that we said we're going to receive. So let's go ahead and receive our goods. Now, like I said, the actual load on you all for this particular step is very, very minimal. This is not about the process. It's not about the actual detail that you have to put in, because legitimately you're going to finish this next step with one click. Okay. But before we do that, let's go ahead and make sure that we verify information. Now, one thing that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, and something that I've alluded to already, is at every step in the purchasing and revenue process, we want to make sure that it follows naturally from the previous step. We have a purchase order, now we're receiving goods. So one of the things that we would need to know is that when the people who are receiving goods, are they receiving the items that are supposed to be on the purchase order? Are they receiving the items in the purchase order? So let's go ahead and make sure that our information is consistent with what was on our purchase order. So we've got a reference number, which is basically the item receipts. This is going to be a receiving number that will be generated by the system, which again, we talked a little bit about why does NetSuite do that automatically for us? It's to create a sequential series of documents that we can use as a trail. If we see a receiving report where there's a gap in those numbers, we want to know why does that gap exist, and what do we need to do to resolve it? Got our date that's automatically in. Remember, our planning partners LLC was our vendor that we're using. Subsidiary United States West, our location is listed. All right, if you followed the track that I had you go through, then probably what you've got, or if you've gone through the purchase order, then when you got to the receiving, automatically it should have receiving checked right here, because this is the item that we're receiving. Now, if this is not checked, you need to check this, because otherwise we can't receive this item. So let's go ahead and take a look and make sure that we're receiving everything that we ordered. So we said we wanted to order a quantity of 30, and if that's the case, hopefully that's what we're receiving. Now, this is the point right here that we would have somebody in the warehouse who's receiving the report. So somebody individual, this is not going to be us again. We're not going through every single part of the purchasing process, doing all these steps ourselves. Again, this is a different individual. But whoever's performing this step would say, I'm going to count the quantity and I'm going to see how many is there. Now, NetSuite does have something that I think could be a little bit improved upon with respect to controls here. You will notice that it actually says what the quantity is, and we're trying to compare those numbers. It says 30 is what we're supposed to be listing here. That's the amount we ordered, and we're receiving quantity. And basically what's going to happen is these two numbers match, then remaining will default to 0. So we're not supposed to receive any anymore. A lot of systems will actually set up the quantity listed on the receiving report, and they will set up these receiving reports, but they won't list the quantity that's supposed to be received. Instead, whoever is in the receiving is supposed to be receiving these items will actually have to input this quantity manually. So this would basically have a blank right here, and we have to count the number of items that are received and input that item manually. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think some systems actually require a blind count of these items? Just make sure that there's accuracy in the detail. Make sure that you're not just saying, okay, 30 items. Sure looks like 30 items. Don't even bother counting. Just say it looks like 30 to me. Okay. So we want to make sure that if somebody is not given this information previously, they have to manually do that count. If they do the manual count correctly, it should come up correctly with comparison to our purchase order. So that's just an extra level accuracy. This is a default that we could set up in the system. Currently, because we don't actually have any physical items, we're not going to be counting anything. So we're just going to assume we received all 30 items. All right. So this is basically where we're at. We're receiving our 30 items. All right. Long-winded explanation on my part. Guess what this involves? This is going to involve one click. So I want you to go over here, check and make sure all this detail is correct. One of the things that we have to make sure that we've got is that we got to make sure that our US 1 is listed as location. We got to make sure we have a quantity of 30. If all of that is correct, we're going to go over save, and we're going to do a little bit of a shortcut. Instead of clicking on save, what I'd like for you to do is to go to the arrow to the right, and you'll notice it pops up an option. We're going to go directly to our billing step. So let's go ahead and go save and bill. Dr. Barnes, you could have been a lot more efficient. That was one click. We could have done that in like 5 seconds, but you would have missed my necessary exposition on this matter, okay? Things that I could test you on, things that are really, really important with respect to the purchasing process. All right, so we have received our goods. We have received our goods. We now need to send a signal to our vendor saying, look, everything's great. We've received our merchandise. You now can send us a bill. And so this is basically the next step. Now, if we had not clicked that bill in advance receipt, the vendor could send that bill to us at any point, okay? We would ignore this next step that we're about to walk through, because you'll notice it says bill up here, okay? This is not us sending a bill. This is us telling the vendor, please send us a bill. So the vendor is going to be linked into our system, and we need to specify that the invoice has now got to be received from the vendor. So we're going to actually create this billing document that basically is kind of a gap document. Again, that process that we went through earlier, we said bill in advance receipts. This step would be completely skipped if we had a check mark at that box, because the vendor could send us the bill at any time. It's just an automatic thing that happens. So this is just an additional control to assure that we actually receive our items before the vendor sends us the invoice. So let's go ahead and get that vendor to send us the invoice. Let's go ahead and check and make sure. We are going to do a couple check things. Again, we're not going to be doing a lot of clicking, but we are going to be doing a lot of checking. So confirming all of our information is correct. The vendor should be good. The amount should be good. Our location looks good. We do have a payables account for 2110, which will be relevant here shortly. And looks like we've got everything that's looked correct. Our form is going to be good. I do want to check one thing. This is going to be kind of non-intuitive. So check our items. Got $14.99 for 30. This is what we should be billed for. On billing, on this billing sub tab here, let's click on that. Yes.
I think I got a little lost.
Okay, hold on just a second. All right, back at it. So where are we at here? So we're checking information, and you will notice over here that it's going to basically say that we're going to be paying $445.20. Now, if we look at our expenses, our amount is $449.70. Why are those two numbers not equal? So that we talked about last week, something we deliberately set up so we can see that difference. Yeah, 1% discount. We're actually paying within 10 days, okay, because we're going to pay today. So we're gonna make that discount. So it's taking that 1% discount out. All right. So that's why we're actually seeing a difference between this amount here and then I didn't mention it, but the amount after discount, which makes perfect sense because that discount is what we're going to be noting. So we're just checking that to make sure that's consistent. That looks good. So assuming that all that's correct, that you've got your discount listed in there, okay, and you've got all the information, you shouldn't have to do anything. We're going to move to our second click of the day, our second click. I guess technically a third click because I did have to click my fourth click. I don't know. I'm not counting clicks. I should stop that. So I should stop that. I just want to be efficient. We're going to click on save, okay? All right. So what do we do here? What do we do here? We have officially received our merchandise. We have told the vendor, we've received the merchandise. Please send us a bill, okay? What do we call that bill again? What is the vendor? What's the form of the bill called? The invoice is going to be sent from the vendor. Yeah, the vendor invoice. And that's the same thing. If we were the vendor, if we're the one sending to the customer, we would issue an invoice when they requested that invoice too. So basically it's processing. It's going to be actually setting that up. All right. So now bill's been sent to us. It's in the system. What do we need to do when we receive a vendor invoice? Now, by the way, it's important to note. You may be asking, I'm looking for the invoice right now. Where's the invoice, Dr. Barnes? Do we see the invoice in the system itself? Okay, why not? Why don't we see the invoice in the system itself? This is a really important part of the process. The vendor's going to send us the invoice, but the reason we don't see the invoice is this is an external document. This is something that's being issued by an external vendor. Now, presumably, if they had access in the system, they could send us an invoice. If they had their own NetSuite system or other ERP system that links, they could send us an invoice system we could view. But we don't currently have that set up, and I'm not skilled enough at NetSuite that I can create my own vendor and be my own vendor and send an invoice to all of you. So again, there's a presumption here that we're receiving an invoice from the vendor. That bill basically sends a signal. They send us an invoice. We verify that invoice. And what are we going to do when we receive that invoice? What is our responsibility? Ignore it. Okay, we're going to ignore that invoice because we don't want to give up any money. No, I'm joking. Okay, we're going to make payment on that invoice. That invoice represents a bill that we have to make payment on. We have an incentive to pay that bill now. Okay, because we do have terms of 1% 10 or 1% 10 net 30. So if we pay within 10 days, we can get a 1% discount, which doesn't sound like much, but if you do millions of dollars of business a year, then that can actually be a substantial amount. What is 1% of millions? $10,000. Anybody in here could use an extra $10,000? I sure could. Okay. So yeah, good option to make. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click on this make payment button. Now I do want to note here, there is a way to actually navigate through this. Okay. And I'm going to show you the path. I'm not going to actually walk through this and I'll explain why. If you needed to navigate through the path here, first of all, the easiest way to go back to the home button, we can actually go back to that original bill transaction and come back to here. But if I wanted to try to make a single payment, I could actually go transactions, payables, pay single vendor. And I could get the list in there and I could find the vendor and I could actually make the payment. The reason I'm not going to go through this process is that by working through the transaction documents in sequence, this document is already filled in for us. It tells us the AP account, it tells us the vendor, it gives us an automatic check number, it fills in all this detail for us. If we went through the pay single vendor path, we would have to input all that information ourselves. Okay. I'm personally a fan of working smarter, not harder, particularly when it means that I could actually make a mistake and click on the wrong item. By actually having this already filled in for us, we're saving a lot of time. We can just move on to the next step. So this is why we're going through this path, why I'm not actually navigating for you to show you. That being said, we can go through the navigation. Again, it's payables, transactions, payables, single vendor. It would pop up a list and we just find our vendor and we would put the information in for this transaction. But the good news is by walking through the bill payment, we're going to do it automatically. So let's just go ahead and check and make sure all the details are correct. So we saw this 2010 payables AP trade. So again, when they send us the invoice, that's when we have a responsibility, or when they send us goods, that's when we have a responsibility to actually pay. We're operating on credit. So what does the transaction look like? What does the accounting transaction look like? So we debit our inventory or our purchases and we credit our payables. because we received an asset, we have a liability to pay in cash at some point in the future. So that's what this is recognizing right here. And then we're going to pay it out of this cash account, which is going to say where the transaction's coming from, which will be relevant here in just a second. By the way, does anybody notice anything about this? 1020, okay, US checking 2. Please make a note of that, as it will be relevant when we start selecting our cash here in just a bit. We're going to write our check from. Today's date, we've also got a bill payment to be generated, so that the payment number is going to be generated by the system. Again, another precaution, another protocol in place by NetSuite, which is really helpful. It's going to specify our check number. We could change this check number, especially if we're writing a manual check. We're not going to, but we could actually adjust this if we needed to. And then all the information set up. I would like to make one real quick modification. So over here where it says memo, go ahead and click to be printed. So there's a little box over here under memo, and it says to be printed. Basically what this is telling us is that we want to print out this check. And this is really important that you actually put this check box in, because you won't be able to print out your check otherwise. And want to guess what your deliverable is for today's assignment? The check. Yes, the check. So if you can't print out the check, you're going to have a hard time making the deliverable. It'll require a lot of re-navigation, a lot of rework to do in order to get back to this. So again, right here, make sure we have this box checked on to be printed so we can actually print this out. One of the other nice things here is that because we worked this, we navigated through specifically through our bill that we created previously, it actually is going to apply payment on that specific bill. If we navigated just trying to find the vendor and then trying to find the information there, we would have to specify the application. We have to say which bill is being paid. Now, it's probably problematic in this scenario because you will notice they've got an outstanding bill here for another item for $15,000, which makes you wonder what the vendor is probably thinking, saying, okay, we're still going to do business even though they've got a $15,000 bill that's almost a year old. Ignoring that, this is a bad business practice, okay? But ignoring that, we're going to be okay. We're saying we're still going to do business here. Still going to do business. All right. So let's go ahead. Make sure got our information is correct. Got our application is correct. We didn't really have to change anything. The only thing that we had to make sure we've modified is that we've actually set up to be printed right over here. And this is going to allow us to make payment. All right. So 5th click of the day. Let's go ahead and click on save. Now you'll notice there's options here. I would like for you to just go and save because we are going to walk through a different step to go through printing the check. So just click on save. And to this point, we have authorized payment in the system. So responsible for making payment now has the approval to actually make the payment. We're going to actually make payment ourselves again because we're playing all the roles in this particular scenario, but this would be hopefully handled by somebody else. Now let's go ahead and go back to the home screen. We should have a track of everything that's going to be set up right here. So we started the purchase order, received our items. This is the signal to the vendor that we want them to send an invoice to us. They send the invoice. Once we receive that, we can authorize payment on the bill. But we've not actually made payment yet, or at least we don't have the evidence of payment yet, I should say. The payment has been made. That's with the authorization, and the system's created that. But we want to actually have evidence for that for this particular item. So this is the step that I told you that we can't actually navigate through, because any of these steps right here, if you get lost, you can just come back to the home screen and click back on this document and just go to the next step. That's the nice part about the sequential process. We're breaking the sequential process now. This is one that you will have to do manually, and I apologize. Like I said, I wanted to keep this simple, but it's pretty straightforward regardless. So we're going to print out our check. Let's go to transactions. We're going to go all the way down to management, not order management, but management, okay? And then we're going to go to print checks and forms. So transactions, management, print checks and forms, and go ahead and click on that. I'm going to leave it up here so people can note that path. Transactions, management, check, print checks and forms. And we already know that we're going to print checks, so let's go ahead and click on checks. All right. So we've got a bit of a problem here. There's nothing here. So that's it. Class dismissed. I'm joking. We do need evidence here, but we do need to actually have to step. All right. So what is the very first thing that we can actually notify? Well, note there's no account listed up here. There's no account here. Where are checks typically paid from? Cash accounts or bank accounts? Okay. Did we talk about a cash account fairly recently? I said, make a note of this so that we can actually have this for the future. Which one was that? Yeah, checking two, cash 1,020 US checking two. And once we actually drop down that menu, look at this. Got the first check number, which is the check number we're dealing with, and we've got our transaction right here. So that's why we had to make a note of that, because in order to be able to pull this up, we had to know what is the account that we're drawing from. Now, specifically, we need to actually have this check to be printed. And it's going to be a check payment for $445.20, which is at $449.70 minus the discount of $4.50. Okay, for paying on early on time. All right, so once you've done that, make sure the account is correct. Don't change the check number. We'll leave that the same. We're going to do print, and we're going to click on print. All right, so you will notice that it creates a document here, and this looks weird, okay? This looks weird. Keep in mind that this would be something that we would put into a print template. It would actually have our checks into a printer that we would print this document onto. So this doesn't look like a check because this is actually print on top of a check. So if your document looks like this, it's correct. So obviously all we need to do is download this file and upload this to Brightspace, right? Why would he say something like that? That sounds so wrong, okay? Why is he saying, what is it? Is it a trap? What did I tell you? You always have to do with the documents in this course. Say them as PDFs, right? This is going to say nlprintchecks.nl. If you upload an NL check, how much points do you get for today's assignment? 0. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this as a PDF file. Print. Microsoft Print PDF. Print it out. And see, once you've actually got your check example set up, I don't know why it's setting. I want back to my reader. Come on. Should look just like this in PDF file. And this is what you need for your deliverable. And lo and behold, that's it. That's all there was to the process. There was not a lot to this. There's a whole lot of pointing and clicking, maybe some typing into the save file. But again, really important to understand how these steps sequence together. Most importantly, understand that certain steps cannot actually proceed until the previous step has been concluded, understanding why. This does reflect back on what we learned back in chapter 6 with respect to the purchasing process. So make sure that you review that information in reviewing to understand for the exam what we were doing here. Why did we do the purchasing process first? The answer is that we need items to sell. So we purchased some AIS, I Love AIS textbooks from our supplier. Next week and the week after, we're going to sell those textbooks. We're going to move into the revenue process, which creates a whole new series of issues. We do have a little bit more detail associated with that. But once you've actually uploaded your document, your PDF document to Brightspace, you're done with today's assignment. You can enjoy the rest of your day.